He said it so casually that it took me a second to register what I'd just heard. We were standing in the kitchen. I was rinsing out my coffee mug. He was scrolling through his phone, and without even looking up, he said, "My guys think I could probably do better, if I were still out there." I turned off the faucet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask him what he meant, because I understood exactly what he meant. His friends, the same ones he'd been spending 3 evenings a week with for the past year, had apparently sat around a table somewhere and decided that his wife wasn't enough. And he had come home and told me about it like he was reading me a weather forecast. "Okay," I said, and I went back to rinsing my mug. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay on my side of the bed staring at the ceiling and thought about the first time I'd felt invisible in this marriage. It wasn't recent. It had been building for years, quietly, the way water damage builds inside a wall. You don't see it until the whole thing collapses. My name is Allison. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 4 years of my marriage, I had been living a double life. Not the kind that involves secrets or lies, exactly, but the kind that happens when you love someone so much that you shrink yourself down to fit inside their idea of who you should be. My husband, I'll call him by what his friends call him, which is just his last name, Hartwell, was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Austin. Good salary, steady work, the kind of man who coaches youth soccer on Saturdays and knows every bartender at every sports bar within a 5-mile radius. People liked him immediately. He was easy to like. When we met, I was 26 and working remotely as a curriculum consultant for a small nonprofit. It was honest work. It didn't pay spectacularly, and somewhere in the first year of our marriage, I think Hartwell built a picture of me in his head. Supportive wife, flexible schedule, always available, and then stopped updating that picture. The thing he didn't know, the thing I had quietly not told him, not out of deception, but out of a kind of exhausted self-protection, was that the nonprofit work had evolved. About 3 years into our marriage, I had been approached by a former colleague, a woman named Brooke, who had an idea for an education technology platform targeting underserved school districts. She needed someone who understood curriculum design from the ground up. I needed something that felt like mine. We built it together, slowly at first, then faster than either of us expected. I worked on it in the early mornings before Hartwell woke up, and during the hours when he thought I was doing my consulting stuff, which was how he described my entire professional life whenever his friends asked about me. "She does consulting stuff." I heard him say it at a barbecue once. He waved his hand when he said it, like he was swatting a fly. I didn't correct him. I told myself it was because I didn't want to jinx anything. The platform wasn't profitable yet. It would feel like bragging about a sandcastle. I told myself I'd tell him when there was something real to tell. By the time there was something real to tell, the habit of not telling him had become so deep that I'd forgotten how to start the conversation. Our platform, which we called Groundwork, had by our 3rd year of operating secured contracts with 14 school districts across Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. We had 31 employees. We had been written up in EdSurge and then, briefly, in a regional piece in the Texas Tribune. We had quietly crossed into profitability 8 months before Hartwell stood in our kitchen and told me his friends thought he could do better. By that point, Brooke and I had also been in early conversations with a national education nonprofit that wanted to license our platform for a federal grant program. The deal, if it closed, would value Groundwork at somewhere around $9 million. I knew all of this. Hartwell knew none of it. After the kitchen conversation, I stopped waiting for the right moment to tell him. I started paying attention instead. I watched how he came home on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Those were his guys' nights, and how he was always slightly louder after them, slightly more confident in a way that felt borrowed. His friends were the kind of men who had opinions about everything and wives who mostly agreed with them. And I think he went to those dinners and came back refueled on someone else's certainty. A few weeks after the kitchen, I found a text on his phone. I wasn't snooping. He'd asked me to check it because his hands were full. It was from one of his friends, the one they all called Coach, though he'd never coached anything. And it said, "Bro, you deserve better." She brings nothing to the table. You're carrying this whole thing. I put the phone down. I finished folding the laundry I'd been folding. That night, I called Brooke and told her to move the licensing conversations forward as fast as we legally could. She asked me why the rush. I told her I'd explain later. The deal closed 11 weeks after that. Groundwork was acquired, not fully, a licensing and equity deal, by a national nonprofit called the Learning Forward Initiative, which itself was backed by a consortium of federal and private funds. Our total valuation came in at $8.4 million. Brooke and I split the equity. My share, after legal fees and taxes, was just under $3.9 million, with ongoing revenue from our district contracts still flowing. I did not tell my husband. I opened a separate account. I moved my direct deposits. I continued to live exactly as I had before. Here's what I want you to understand about that period. I wasn't planning a revenge story. I wasn't plotting anything dramatic. I was mostly just tired, and I was grieving something, the version of my marriage I had thought we were building, and I didn't know yet what I was going to do. What clarified things was his birthday dinner. Hartwell turned 35 in October. He wanted to celebrate at a steakhouse downtown, one of those places with a 2-page whiskey menu and Wagyu on the prefixie. He'd been talking about it for weeks. He invited 8 of his friends. He mentioned, as an afterthought, that I was welcome to come. Welcome to come, I repeated. I mean, obviously you're invited, he said, and he was already looking back at his phone. I thought about that phrase for a long time. Welcome to come, to my husband's birthday dinner, as though I were an optional addition, as though the table had been set and someone had decided there might be a spare chair. I told him I'd be there. What I didn't tell him was that I'd also made a phone call that week. The Texas Tribune had been trying to schedule a follow-up interview with me about groundwork and the acquisition. There was a feature story in progress about women-founded ed-tech companies reshaping public education in the South. I had been putting it off. I stopped putting it off. The interview ran as an online piece the morning of his birthday. Print edition would follow the next week. I saw it go live at 6:47 in the morning, sitting in our bathroom with the door closed. There was a photo, a good one, from our office, and a headline that named me directly. It talked about the acquisition. It mentioned the valuation. It quoted me on the experience of building something real, why the people around you assume you're building nothing. That last part was not an accident. I got dressed. I made coffee. I did not say anything. By the time we arrived at the restaurant that evening, some of his friends had already seen it, or their wives had, which is how these things travel. I could tell by the way a few of them went quiet when we walked in, and the way Coach looked at me and then immediately looked away. Hartwell hadn't seen it. He doesn't read the Tribune. He doesn't read much. We sat down. There were 9 of us around the table. Hartwell, 6 of his friend's wife Amanda, who had been quietly kind to me for years, and me. The whiskey started flowing. The apps came out. Hartwell was in his element, laughing loud, doing the thing he does, where he retells a story he's already told 3 times and everyone acts like it's fresh. About halfway through the main course, one of his friends, the one named Dale, who works in commercial real estate, leaned across the table and said, not unkindly but not quietly either, "Allison, hey, my wife sent me something today, something about you." The table went partially quiet. I took a sip of my water. "She builds curriculum software," Hartwell said, waving his hand in that same way. "She probably got mentioned in some education thing." "No, man," Dale said slowly. He was looking at his phone now. "This is the Tribune. This is a real article." He looked up at me. $8.4 million? There was a longer silence. I looked at my husband. He was looking at Dale's phone with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not quite confusion, not quite recognition. Something in between, like a man who's been handed a document in a language he's almost sure he used to speak. "Hartwell," I said, and my voice was very calm. "I've been meaning to talk to you. I didn't perform it. I didn't rehearse a speech. I just told the truth, the way you should have been able to tell it years earlier, across a kitchen table on a regular Tuesday, if the person you were telling it to had ever actually asked. I told them, all of them, because they were all there. and there was no point anymore in compartmentalizing. That 3 years ago, my colleague and I had built an education technology platform from scratch, that we had grown it to 31 employees and contracts with over a dozen school districts. That 4 months ago we had finalized a licensing and equity acquisition that valued the company at $8.4 million. That my share of that was just under $4 million, and that I had a meeting in 2 weeks with our legal team about what came next. I said it the way you read a list of ingredients. Just information, just facts. Coach laughed first, a short, involuntary sound like something escaping, and then caught himself. Amanda reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Hartwell didn't say anything. He was still holding his fork. There was a piece of Wagyu on it that he hadn't eaten. "You never told me," he said finally. "No," I said, "I didn't." "Why?" I thought about all the ways I could answer that. I thought about the kitchen conversation and the text from Coach, and the 4 years of she does consulting stuff and welcome to come and every dinner where his friends held court about their deals and their promotions and their futures, while I sat at the end of the table and smiled and topped off people's glasses. "I didn't think you were interested," I said. "You never asked." That landed the way I knew it would. I wasn't trying to wound him in front of his friends. I genuinely wasn't. But the truth has weight, and you can't always control where it falls. We drove home separately. He rode with Coach, I think. Or maybe he sat in an Uber alone. I don't know. I took our car. I rolled the windows down even though it was October and the air was already cool, and I drove home through the lit-up streets of Austin, feeling something I didn't have a word for yet, not triumph, not sadness. Something more like the particular quiet that comes after you've stopped holding your breath. The next few weeks were hard in the way that honest things are hard. Hartwell and I talked, really talked, for the first time in maybe 2 years. He was angry at first, and I understood it, even when it wasn't fair. He felt lied to. I told him I understood that, and also that there is a difference between lying and not being seen, and that I had spent 4 years waiting to be seen, and the waiting had worn me down. He wanted to know why I hadn't just told him. I told him the truth, that in the beginning there was nothing to tell. And then there was something to tell. But I was scared it would fail, and he'd hold it against me. And then it didn't fail, and by then I'd grown so used to being the background of his life that I didn't know how to step into the foreground. He cried once, and I think it was genuine. I think he was crying about the person he'd let himself become, the kind of man who repeats things his friends say about his wife, who comes home a little bit bigger after an evening of borrowed confidence. I cried too, but later, alone, and I was crying about something different, about all the versions of this marriage that might have existed if we'd talked like this 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. We tried. I want to tell you that we tried sincerely. 6 weeks of what felt like real effort, actual conversations at the dinner table, less time with the guys, more eye contact. He came to my office once and stood in the doorway and looked around at everything I'd built and didn't say anything for a long moment and then said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "But some things, once they've been said, don't unsay themselves. My guys think I could do better." He never formally apologized for it. He said he didn't really mean it, which isn't the same thing. And I found myself looking at him across the dinner table some evenings and thinking, I have spent 4 years making myself smaller so you would feel bigger. I have poured myself into a company and kept it secret because I didn't trust you to be proud of me. What does it mean that I was right not to trust you? I filed for divorce in February. It was not a dramatic morning. I made coffee. I sent an email to my attorney. I told Hartwell that evening, and he sat down very slowly in the kitchen chair, in the same kitchen where he told me his friends thought he could do better, and he nodded, like he'd been waiting for it. The settlement was straightforward. The house was mine before we married, my business was mine, and our joint account was minimal. My attorney handled everything with the kind of calm efficiency that you only appreciate when your own emotional reserves are completely depleted. Brooks sent me flowers when I told her. "Finally," she said, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like weeks. Groundwork, meanwhile, had not slowed down. The Learning Forward Initiative partnership had opened doors I hadn't anticipated. We were in conversations about expanding into 3 new states, and a second acquisition conversation had begun with a much larger player. I was not ready to talk about that publicly yet, but I knew what was coming, and for the first time in years I knew it without the weight of anyone else's doubt pressing down on it. I moved my home office into the second bedroom. I bought a coffee maker I'd always wanted, a real one, a Breville, the kind with a grinder built in, and I made coffee in my kitchen on quiet mornings and read the news and answered emails and felt, slowly, like I was taking up exactly the amount of space I was supposed to take up. One evening in March, I got a message from Amanda, Coach's wife, the one who had touched my hand at the restaurant. She said she'd been thinking about me and wanted to grab lunch sometime, just the 2 of us, and that she admired what I'd built. I wrote back the next morning. We had lunch the following week. She told me over a chopped salad at a place near my office that the guys had talked about the birthday dinner for weeks afterward. That Coach had been quieter than usual, that there had been a conversation, apparently, about what it means to actually know your partner, to ask questions, to pay attention, to be curious about the person sleeping next to you. I hoped that conversation had done some good. I genuinely did. On the drive back to my office, I thought about something Brooke had said to me early on. In the first year, we were building groundwork. When I was exhausted and second-guessing everything and wondering if I should just let it go, she said, "You can be invisible to the wrong people for a really long time and still end up exactly where you're supposed to be." I hadn't understood it fully then. I think I understand it now. I keep thinking about that kitchen, the faucet, the way I turned off the water and said okay and went back to rinsing my mug like nothing had happened, because I had spent so long training myself to absorb things quietly that my body just did it on its own. That's the part I sat with the longest. Not the birthday dinner, not the article, not the settlement, the kitchen. Because that moment, that small, ordinary, devastating moment, was the result of 1,000 smaller moments I had let pass without saying a word. Every time I described my work as just consulting stuff to avoid an awkward conversation. Every time I let him tell his friends I didn't do much. Every time I chose his comfort over my own honesty. I built that silence, brick by brick, and then was surprised when it became a wall I couldn't see over. What I understand now is that there's a cost to hiding who you are from someone who's supposed to be your partner. Not just a cost to the relationship, a cost to you. I got so good at being invisible that I started to believe maybe I deserved to be. That's not humility. That's erosion. Brooke used to say I was one of the sharpest people she'd worked with, and I used to brush it off. I thought she was being generous. But the truth is, I just stopped trusting my own judgment inside my marriage, even as I was making real decisions, real, consequential, correct decisions in every other part of my life. The same mind that built groundwork from a shared Google Doc into a $9 million valuation was also the mind that convinced itself it wasn't worth fighting to be seen at a dinner table. That gap between who I was at work and who I allowed myself to be at home is what I'm still reconciling. I don't think what happened to my marriage was fate. I think it was cause and effect, playing out slowly over years. He stopped asking questions, so I stopped offering answers. I stopped offering answers, so he stopped knowing me. He stopped knowing me. He listened to other people's opinions of me instead. And I let all of it happen, because I had confused keeping the peace with keeping the marriage. Here's what I've learned, and I mean this in the most practical, grounded way I know. Doing the right thing by yourself. Being honest about who you are. Protecting what you've built. Refusing to shrink is not selfishness. It's what makes you someone worth building a life with, and the willingness to keep going anyway. To keep showing up to work and making good decisions and building something real even when the person closest to you has no idea it's happening. That's not martyrdom either. That's just what it looks like to have a foundation that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. Amanda texted me last week to say groundwork was mentioned in an Edweek piece. She's become a real friend, the kind I didn't know I was missing. Sometimes the right people come into focus only after the wrong picture finally gets taken down. I don't know what Hartwell tells people now about why we divorced. I stopped needing to know. I made my coffee this morning in my kitchen, in the quiet, and I felt not happy exactly. Not yet, but something more durable than happy. I felt like myself, and I think that's where it starts.